This is the power steering reservoir. This is what you will fill your hydraulic oil in so it can serve by that hose down into the hydraulic pump. This is the hydraulic pump. Now this hydraulic pump is going to pressurize that fluid and send it to the steering box to assist in turning the vehicle. Normally without this power steering pump, if you had to turn that wheel manually, it will take extreme amount of force. By the end of the day, you're going to become oil fatigued and tired just from driving your vehicle. So the reason the hydraulic pump and its power steering system was added to the engine is obviously to alleviate your stress during daily driving. So eventually, when this seal becomes bad enough that it's dripping fluid to the floor, in our situation, you're going to have the tendency to get air bubble into the system. From this seal, it's just going to raise up itself and get into the line and get back to the hydraulic pump. What's going to happen here is when you're driving the vehicle, anytime you turn the steering wheel within a 5-degree counter steer or oversteer, you're going to hear a grinding noise from the power steering hydraulic pump. This noise, this grinding noise, is actually a cavitating sound that you're getting from the hydraulic fluid mixed with air bubble. This is a normal condition. And when you get this sound, you're going to notice the level on the reservoir is going to be almost at the bottom. So you're going to have to add more oil into the reservoir. But still, even when the reservoir has oil, you're still going to get that cavitating sound from the hydraulic pump, because you have to remember the air is entering the system from the steering box, Pitman arm shaft seal. During the process of this replacement, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to remove this reservoir. You see when you look inside there, you see a little bit of contamination. Well, that's going to be neat to clean out of there, but this is not that of a bad situation where it's going to need to be cleaned. In some application where the fluid was never changed or replaced for over 100,000 miles, in there it's going to probably have some sludge on the bottom where it has to be strained, and that will also contribute to a cavitating noise because we're restricting the flow of fuel. So the pump will always create a cavitating sound when the fuel is restrictive or if air is entering the hydraulic system from any one of the line, seal, or fitting. So I got lucky with removing this low pressure line with the regular combination wrench. But what happened, I couldn't get this one removed with the conventional combination wrench of its size. So before I destroy this fitting, if you take a closer look what's going on there, and you can see those little teeth mark. Well, that I tried to put a vice grip on it. And this is what you're going to do when, your tool turn up to be missing. But what I did is just had to stop for now. I ordered a proper tool for this line, and we're going to remove it properly with the proper tool. Now we could continue with our part 2 series on trying to remove this flare fitting. You see, this is called a flare nut. And the purpose of this nut is to basically seal the bottom of this flare line to the inside of its fitting hole. This flare nut is not really to seal the system. It just applies pressure to this flare end to create a seal. For if the oil was to leak past this flare, it will most likely leak past the thread. So the thread on the flare fitting nut is not for sealing the fluid. It's simply to apply compression to the line to create a seal. The reason I'm telling you that is that I don't want you to grab this fitting with a vice grip and try to turn it off, because what's going to happen is you're going to turn this circular or the circumference of this flare nut oval, and that will be unable to apply a even pressure around this flare fitting to create a perfect seal. What I had to do is I had to go to the parts store and make a purchase of this line wrench. This side is a 12 and that side is a 14. I also purchased a larger one, which is a 15-17, and you're going to want to also get the 10 and 8mm in this version that most likely you're going to use on brake lines. So what I want to do is I want to fit this flare line wrench, and I want to make sure I use the right side because you could get confused. So I want to put the 14mm on this end, but you see it does not seat all the way down. So that's a problem. So I want to position this wrench where it could seat itself all the way down onto the flare nut. So I'm going to have to use another wrench to basically impact it. So it's very important that this wrench is seated perfectly onto the flare nut, or you're going to still end up stripping it. So that will be the position you want to have your line wrench in. You see, the edge of this opening is so thick that it's touching the casting on the steering box when you position the wrench any other position beside this position. So this is the ideal position for fitting the line wrench to the flare fitting for removal. So to ease the pressure of removal, we're going to use another wrench. Simply just going to place it onto the end. If you could get a smaller one, would be preferable. And we just want to apply moderate pressure until we can turn the line. So the wrench is not going to turn anymore because this proves to us that this end is jamming onto the steering box. So once we have this loose, we could either walk it off with our hand, or we could use our conventional 14mm wrench for completing its removal. Well, the best way to remove this, or to ease it from becoming damaged, is you want to soak the threads with that power lube. You want to make sure you could soak it overnight or for a long period of time. This way the oil could get down onto the threads, freeing it from any corrosion or any object that may cause it to remain fixed. So that is what we want. We have our line removed. So this one is a 14, and this one here is a 17. Now that we have the two line removed, the next thing I want to do, now I want to release these 4 bolts that hold this plate for the Pitman arm and the gearbox shaft. I want to release these bolts now, and you're going to want to do the same thing, because when we're going to get this device on the work table or on the floor to work on, we're not going to be able to place it in a vise to hold it fixed for releasing these 4 bolts. So now will be the best time for releasing these bolts, since the steering box is still fixed to the frame rail. So I'm using a 15mm 3/8 drive ratchet. With this 3/8 drive ratchet, you're going to want to use the pipe for leveraging the torque. So here we're going to need to use a 15mm combination wrench. Alright, so since I can't locate the 15mm combination wrench for releasing these 2 bolts on the back, we're going to proceed with our removal by detaching 3 of these nuts. And then we're going to be able to tilt this a little forward, or in some position that we could release these 2 bolts before we could completely take this hydraulic power steering box out from the frame rail. The Rockguard security plate, that would be this right here, will need to be removed from the frame structure under the vehicle, and you can do so with a 10mm socket. And you're going to have approximately 5 bolts to remove, 2 in the back and 3 up front. Then we'll be able to gain access to the steering box. But one important security feature is that this tire remain under the vehicle while you're working on it. In the event that the jack stand should slip and the vehicle should fall, that tire is your only protection. So always make sure it's under a vehicle when you're working on the vehicle. Let's take a look at the fixture bolt for the steering box to the frame rail. These are the 4 bolts that we're going to have to remove to get the steering box out from the engine compartment. So we're going to want to use a 19mm box wrench for holding the nut, and then we're going to turn the bolt on the outside. With my 19mm fix on the nut and ready for turning to brace itself when I turn this bolt, I will now use my 19mm 1/2-inch drive socket to remove the bolt. So now I don't want to use a hammer on the reverse side of this bolt to hammer it out, because that could damage the threads. I'm now going to use a little pry bar. So this is our bolt, and that's our nut. And what we want to do is we want to make sure we keep them together. You do not want to throw the bolts like this and the nut like this. You always want to replace the nut onto the bolt. And then you can place it into your tool pan. Let's move to the top one. Alright, so again, this is the bolt above the one that we removed. And that is how we want to place our wrench. This way it's going to brace itself against the body or the center link. Alright, so when you're under the vehicle working on this nut and bolt, you're going to want to make sure you wear some form of eye protection, because the dust will most likely fall into your eyes. We are now going to figure a placement for the combination wrench on this bolt with the nut on the reverse side. Alright, so this is the position that we're going to place our 19mm wrench, and it's going to brace itself against the alternator once we start to turn it. Alright, once you have the bolt untightened, you're going to have to hold the wrench and ratchet the bolt off. Alright, so you have to remember when you're under the vehicle to use a respirator and some form of eye protection like a goggle. But we want to replace our nut onto our bolt. You must always remember, if the bolt does not remove when you try to pull it, always use a pry bar and try to pry it out from between the head. Never impact the threaded side with a hammer, because you could damage a thread and you could cross thread this nut when you're going to be making your replacement. And this cross threaded nut is not going to give you a true value in torque when it's required for you to retorque this bolt and the steering box to the frame rail. So now we have our last bolt. And what I want to do is I just want to release it, untighten it, so this box could tilt a little bit down. Then we could move back to the top up here for releasing the 2 additional bolts that remain. Okay, so we're going to position our wrench the same way as we did below on the nut. And what we want is we want to brace our 19mm wrench against the alternator casing when we're going to be turning the bolt. Well, it's not really safe to brace that wrench against the alternator casing because, as you know, we could break the alternator casing. But if you had an extra hand, that extra hand will be able to hold the wrench in position while you turn on the outside. You can see our steering box has tilted forward to give us some access in on these 2 remaining bolts. So the best tool for here is a 15mm wrench. But since one of my Guyanese associates walk away with the tool, I have to try with this ratchet and socket. So this is going to happen to you. You're going to be missing your tools, and you're going to have to use alteration tools for removing parts that require a different tool. Alright, so we have our 4 bolts on the top release. Now I'm going to continue to completely removing this 19mm bolt and nut, and we're going to take the box out of there because I have to go and get the appropriate tool, the C-clip tool for removing this inner C-clip. And before we could leave, what I want to do is I want to make sure I take some plastic bag. I just want to stuff it in here, and on the cover side, what this is going to do for us is going to prevent dust and sand from develop on the internal if the wind should blow the dust in that direction. Another thing we want to look at is the shaft that we removed. So this is the seal that we almost damaged, and I have restored it. This is a water and dirt seal, And this seal sits around here. This mark that you see above the seal is actually the oil seal. What most people will do is they will get rid of this seal and just use the oil seal, where you could see the C-clip on the bottom of this housing. So they will basically reinstall this shaft just like this with the C-clip exposed using just the oil seal, and they're going to get rid of this one. The reason why they're going to do that is because next time this seal should become defective or worn out, they will just remove the C-clip, start the engine, and this seal will push itself out for a replacement. But we want to make sure we reuse this dirt and water seal, because what's going to happen is if we replace the gearbox like this, is that water and dirt is going to tend to develop inside this clearance area between the shaft and the seal, and it's going to affect the oil seal performance to endure. Here you can see I've already used the sandpaper for restoring the surface on the shaft absolutely smooth. So you basically just want to take the sandpaper like this, just want to wrap it, and this should be able to restore a machine surface for our new seal. You just have to keep passing your hands like this, making sure you feel no channels or grooves on the shaft. Alright, let's take a break to talk about safety and working condition. This is a point where you're going to want to clean the floor. We want to make sure we wash all the grease and oil from the floor. It's going to reduce the chance of slip and fall.